There are moments, rare, unexplainable moments, when time itself seems to pause, when something unseen reaches through the noise of your life and grips your spirit with a force you cannot ignore. This is one of those moments. This is not just another video. This is not just another message passing through your screen. No, this is a divine interruption. And the fact that you are here, right now, reading these words is not coincidence. It is calling. Something in you already knows that. You felt it before you even clicked. That subtle pull, that quiet urgency, that whisper in your spirit saying, "Stop. Pay attention. This is for you." You may not have understood it, but you obeyed it. And that obedience, yes, even something as small as staying here right now, has positioned you at the edge of a supernatural shift that has your name written all over it. Because tonight something is unfolding. Have you noticed it? That strange heaviness that comes and goes without explanation. The feeling that no matter how hard you try, certain patterns just keep repeating. The doors that always open, but then don't. The relationships that start right, but end wrong. The peace that comes close, but never fully stays. It's like something has been working quietly in the background of your life, something you couldn't quite see, couldn't quite name, but you felt it. And deep down, you've asked yourself questions you couldn't answer. Why does this keep happening to me? Why does it feel like I'm fighting something I can't see? Why does it feel like no matter how much I grow, something keeps pulling me back? Listen carefully, because this is where everything begins to make sense. This was never random. This was never just bad luck. This was never just life being unfair. There has been a pattern, a cycle, something moving through your bloodline long before you were even born. Something that attached itself to generations before you, silently repeating, quietly influencing, subtly limiting. Not always obvious, not always loud, but always present. And you were the one chosen to feel it. Not because you are weak, but because you are aware. Not because you are broken, but because you are sensitive to truth. You were never meant to ignore it. You were meant to confront it. And that is why this message found you. Because heaven does not interrupt without intention. Heaven does not speak without purpose. Heaven does not call your attention unless something is about to change. Right now, as you listen, there is movement happening beyond what your eyes can see. There is a shifting in the spiritual realm that has been set into motion specifically for you, specifically for your bloodline. Things that have been hidden are beginning to stir. Things that have been buried are beginning to rise. And things that have been holding on are about to be forced to let go. But here's what you must understand: before anything is broken, it is revealed. Before anything is reversed, it is exposed. Before anything is restored, it is confronted. And tonight is the beginning of that revelation. You didn't stumble into this. You were summoned. You were called into this moment because something within your bloodline has reached its breaking point. Something that has operated in silence for too long is now being brought into the light. And you, yes, you, are standing at the center of it. This is not just about your life. This is about everything that came before you and everything that will come after you. You are the turning point. You are the interruption. You are the moment where the cycle meets resistance. And tonight heaven is saying, it ends here. But you must stay. You must listen. You must remain spiritually alert. Because what is about to be revealed next will explain everything you've been feeling, and it will change how you see your entire life. This is only the beginning. And what comes next is deeper than you expect. Type "I am ready" in the comments if you feel this message aligning with your spirit. Blessing code 1717 is now activating around your life. There had been a weight on you, not always heavy enough to crush you, but never light enough to ignore. It followed you in quiet moments, in the spaces between your thoughts, in the stillness of your nights when everything else went silent. You tried to explain it away. You called it stress. You called it exhaustion. You told yourself it was just life being complicated. But deep within your spirit, you knew this was something else. And didn't start with you, did it? There were signs long before you had the language to describe them. Patterns that repeated themselves in your family like echoes bouncing through generations. Broken relationships that looked different on the surface but carried the same root. Financial struggles that seemed to rise just when stability was within reach. Emotional wounds passed down like silent inheritances, never spoken about, but always felt. You saw it in them, and then one day, you realized you were experiencing it too. And that realization didn't come with clarity, it came with confusion. Because how do you fight something you cannot see? How do you break something you cannot fully understand? How do you escape something that feels like it's woven into the very fabric of your life? This is the hidden weight. It is subtle. It is quiet. It does not always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes, it disguises itself as normal. It convinces you that this is just how things are. It makes dysfunction feel familiar and cycles feel inevitable. It teaches you to expect disappointment, to prepare for loss, to brace yourself for things falling apart just when they begin to come together. And slowly, without even realizing it, it conditions your spirit and teaches you to shrink your expectations. It teaches you to celebrate less, to hope less, to trust less. Because somewhere deep inside, there is a voice whispering, it won't last anyway. That voice, that quiet, persistent doubt, it didn't originate from your mind. It was planted through repetition, through experience, through patterns that were never meant to continue, but were never stop. Until now. You see, what you have been feeling is not weakness. It is awareness. You are the one in your bloodline who could sense that something was off. You are the one who questioned what others accepted. You are the one who felt the discomfort even when everything looked fine on the outside. And that sensitivity, that awareness, that refusal to settle into unconscious patterns, that is exactly why this burden has felt heavier on you. Because you were never meant to carry it, you were meant to confront it. There were moments when you almost broke free. Moments when things seemed to shift, when clarity began to rise, when you felt like you were stepping into something new. But then, something would happen. A setback, a distraction, a sudden emotional pull back into old patterns. And just like that, you were pulled back into the same cycle you thought you had escaped. That was not failure. That was resistance. Because anything that has operated for generations does not release its hold easily. It tightens before it breaks. It resists before it collapses. It pushes back hardest when it senses it is about to lose its grip. And what you have been experiencing is that resistance. But here is the truth that changes everything. What has been hidden is now being revealed. The weight you have been carrying without a name is finally being exposed for what it is. Not to scare you, not to overwhelm you, but to awaken you. Because when something is seen clearly, it can no longer control you in the same way. Once something is named, it begins to lose its power. Once something is brought into the light, it can no longer thrive in the shadows. And that is exactly what is happening right now. You are beginning to see the pattern. You are beginning to connect the dots. You are beginning to understand that what you thought was personal was actually generational. What you thought was random was actually repeated. What you thought was just your struggle was actually something that had been passed down, unchallenged, for far too long. But it met something different in you. It met awareness. It met resistance. It met someone who refused to stay asleep. And that is why this weight is shifting now. Not because it disappeared on its own, but because you have reached a point where you can no longer carry it unconsciously. You are being awakened to it so you can step out of it. You are being shown it so you can separate from it. You are being confronted with it so you can finally break it. This is the moment where confusion begins to turn into clarity. This is the moment where the invisible begins to become visible. This is the moment where what controlled you in silence begins to lose its authority. And as this understanding settles into your spirit, something else is rising within you, something stronger than the weight you've been carrying. A knowing, a quiet, unshakable knowing that this does not continue, that this does not define you, that this ends. But before it breaks completely, you must understand where it came from. You must see how it has operated. You must recognize the patterns that have been hiding in plain sight. Because what is about to be revealed next will show you the full picture of the battle that has been surrounding your bloodline all along. I see the pattern in the comments if this is speaking to your spirit. Blessing code 2020 is now surrounding you. There is a battle that has been running through your bloodline long before you ever took your first breath. It did not begin with you, and for a long time, it moved unnoticed, unchallenged, and uninterrupted. It passed from one generation to the next, not always in obvious ways, but in patterns and behaviors and outcomes that seemed different on the surface, yet carried the same spiritual root underneath. If you look closely, you can trace it. The same kind of struggles showing up in different forms. The same emotional wounds wearing different faces. The same limitations repeating themselves even when circumstances change. One generation battled scarcity, another faced instability. One dealt with broken trust, another with silent resentment. It shifted shapes, but it never truly left. That is how generational cycles operate. They do not need to look identical to remain active. They only need to carry the same essence. And that essence has been working quietly, influencing decisions, shaping reactions, and creating outcomes that feel strangely familiar, even when you try to go a different direction. You may have told yourself, "I will not live like that." You may have made promises, deep and sincere, that your life would be different. And yet somehow, pieces of those same patterns still found their way into your journey. Not because you failed, but because the cycle was still alive. This is the part many people never fully understand. These patterns are not just habits. They are not just learned behaviors. They are reinforced over time through repetition, through environment, through unhealed wounds that were never addressed, only carried forward. What is not confronted gets continued. What is not healed gets repeated. What is not understood gains power. And in your bloodline, something was never fully confronted. Something was tolerated. Something was normalized. And over time, it built momentum. It became stronger with each generation that accepted it as just the way things are. It embedded itself deeper into the identity of the family, shaping how people loved, how they trusted, how they handled conflict, how they approached opportunities, how they responded to pressure. And then you came, and something in you refused to accept it. You may not have had the words for it at first, but you felt it. An inner resistance, a discomfort when things did align, that awareness that something was off, even when others acted like everything was normal. You questioned things that were never questioned before. You felt the weight of things others seemed numb to. That is not accidental. That is what happens when a cycle meets someone who is no longer willing to carry it unconsciously. But here is where the battle intensifies. Because cycles that have existed for generations do not release quietly. They resist disruption. They push back against change. They create pressure, confusion, and sometimes even isolation around the person who begins to challenge them. You may have felt misunderstood. You may have felt like you were the only one seeing things differently. You may have even questioned yourself, wondering if you were overthinking or imagining it. You were not. You were seeing clearly for the first time. And clarity always disrupts what was allowed to remain hidden. This is why the tension increased when you started growing. This is why certain relationships felt strained as you began to change. This is why stepping into something better often came with unexpected resistance. It was not just external circumstances. It was the cycle reacting to your awareness. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And once you begin to separate from it, it begins to lose its hold. But before it loses completely, it tries to hold tighter. That is the stage you have been in. Moments of progress followed by sudden pullbacks. Breakthroughs interrupted by confusion. Clarity followed by doubt. It felt like moving forward and being dragged back at the same time. That is not coincidence. That is resistance at its peak. Because the cycle recognizes something. It recognizes that you are different. It recognizes that if it loses its grip on you, it loses its continuation. It recognizes that you are not just another part of the pattern. You are the interruption to it. And that is why the pressure has felt so specific, so persistent, so targeted. But here is what shifts everything. This battle is no longer hidden. What once operated in silence is now being exposed in awareness. And exposure changes the dynamic. Because what is seen can be confronted. What is understood can be broken. What is recognized can no longer move unnoticed. You are no longer reacting blindly. You are beginning to respond with clarity. And that clarity is the beginning of the end for what hath been repeating for generations. Because cycles do not end randomly. They end when someone becomes aware enough, strong enough, and intentional enough to stop participating in them. They end when someone decides, consciously, that this will not continue through them. They end when someone steps out of what is familiar and into what is aligned. And that someone is you. But understand this clearly. You are not just dealing with patterns. You are standing at the center of a generational shift. What you choose now, what you see now, what you allow and what you no longer tolerate, it does not only affect your life. And changes the direction of everything connected to you. This is bigger than a moment. This is a turning point. And as this battle reaches its peak, something else is about to happen. Something that does not come from effort alone, but from a higher authority stepping in. Because when a cycle has run long enough, there comes a moment where intervention begins. And what is about to unfold next is that moment. Type "I break the cycle" in the comments if you feel this shift happening. Blessing code 3030 is now activated around your bloodline. As this truth settles into your spirit, understand this. Every time a message like this reaches someone who is still trapped in their cycle, a light is lit in their darkness. This is not about a platform. It is about a mission. There are souls right now, just like you were, searching for clarity, waiting for a sign, needing a voice that breaks through confusion. When you choose to support through PayPal or Super Thanks, you are not just giving, you are sowing into transformation. The word says that what you sow, you will also reap, and in this moment, you are planting seeds of freedom into lives you may never see, but heaven will always record. If you feel that pull within you, that quiet knowing that says, "I want to be part of this," then act on it now. The PayPal link is in the description. and you will also find it in the QR code at the bottom right of this video. Do not hesitate. Step into this moment of obedience and release your seed, because what you activate in others, heaven will multiply back into your life. There comes a moment in every prolonged battle, in every repeated cycle, in every silent struggle that has stretched across time, where a decision is made beyond the visible realm. A moment where what has been allowed to continue is suddenly no longer permitted. A moment where patience gives way to intervention. And for your bloodline, that moment has arrived. You have to understand something deeply. Nothing that has happened has gone unseen. Every pattern, every delay, every silent frustration you carried without answers, it was all witnessed. Not just by you, not just by those around you, but by a higher authority that does not overlook detail, does not forget injustice, and does not ignore prolonged imbalance. For a long time, things were allowed to unfold, not because they were right, but because they were unchallenged. Not because they were meant to continue, but because no one had yet reached the point of breaking them. Generational cycles often persist because they go uncontested. They are absorbed, adapted to, and passed forward. And as long as they remain unexamined, they remain active. But the moment awareness enters, the moment resistance rises, the moment someone begins to question and step outside of what has always been, that is when the dynamic begins to shift. And that is exactly what happened when you began to see. Your awareness was not passive. It was a signal. It was the moment the pattern was no longer operating in silence. It was the moment something higher recognized that the cycle had met its interruption point. And from that moment forward, the process of intervention began. There is a threshold to everything. A point where repetition becomes excessive. A point where imbalance becomes unsustainable. A point where what has been tolerated can no longer continue without consequence. And when that threshold is crossed, a decision is made. That decision is what you are stepping into now. This is not about emotion. It is not about reaction. It is about alignment being restored. Because what has been operating in your bloodline was never meant to be permanent. It continued because it was unchallenged. But now that it hath been seen, now that it hath been recognized, now that it hath been brought into awareness, it has lost the ability to continue in the same way. That is what changes everything. There is a shift that happens when something is no longer hidden. Its influence weakens. Its patterns become visible. Its repetition becomes interruptible. And once it can be interrupted, it can be ended. That is the moment you are in. You may not see it fully yet, but something has already been set into motion. The same cycles that once felt inevitable are now being destabilized. The same patterns that once repeated without resistance are now encountering something different. Your awareness, your refusal, your decision to not continue unconsciously. And that decision carries weight. Because cycles do not just end externally, they end internally first. They end the moment you stop justifying what no longer aligns. They end the moment you stop participating in what you now recognize. They end the moment you stop returning to what you have outgrown. And that is where you are now. You are no longer in the stage of unconscious repetition. You are in the stage of conscious separation. This is where things begin to shift, but it is also where things can feel uncertain. Because stepping out of a long-standing pattern creates space. And space at first can feel unfamiliar. It can feel like something is missing, like something is unsettled. But that is not loss, that is transition. That is what happens when something that has always been present begins to release. And as it releases, something else begins to take its place. Clarity. You are beginning to see connections you did not see before. You are beginning to understand your experiences differently. You are beginning to recognize patterns as they happen, instead of after they repeat. And that shift in perception is not small, it is foundational. Because once you can see clearly, you can choose differently. And different choices lead to different outcomes. That is how cycles break. Not through force, not through reaction, but through consistent, conscious decisions that no longer align with what hath been. And that is exactly what hath been activated in you. You are no longer moving through life on autopilot. You are no longer absorbing patterns without question. You are no longer repeating without awareness. You are stepping into something new, something that has not existed in your bloodline before. Intelligent. And that is what triggers intervention. Because when effort meets awareness, and awareness meets intention, it creates a point where higher alignment can take hold. A point where what was once tolerated is no longer supported. A point where continuation is no longer an option. That is the moment where everything begins to reverse. You may not see the full outcome yet, but the direction has already changed. The momentum that once carried those cycles forward is no longer uninterrupted. It hath been disrupted. And once disruption begins, continuation becomes unstable. This is the turning point. This is the moment where what has been repeating begins to lose its structure. This is the moment where what felt permanent begins to unravel. This is the moment where what defined the past no longer determines the future. And as this shift continues, something else becomes clear. You were not just meant to see this. You were meant to lead the change. Because awareness alone is not the end. It is the beginning of responsibility. And what you are about to step into next will show you exactly why you were the one meant to carry this moment forward. There is something you must come to terms with now, something that may feel heavy at first, but will ultimately set you free. You were never just meant to observe what has been happening in your bloodline. You were never meant to simply recognize the patterns, understand the cycles, and then move on. No, your awareness came with a purpose. Your clarity came with an assignment. And your presence in this moment is not accidental. It is intentional. You were chosen to break what others carried. The truth may feel overwhelming when you first accept it, because it means the weight you have felt, the resistance you have encountered, the intensity of your experiences. It was never random. It was never meaningless. It was never just your life being difficult. It was the pressure that comes when something long-standing meets someone who is capable of ending it. And that someone is you. You have to understand why it feels different for you. Why things affected you more deeply. Why you questioned things others ignored. Why you felt the need to grow, to change, to step out of what was familiar even when it would have been easier to stay. That was not coincidence. That was alignment. Because breaking a cycle requires someone who is willing to see beyond it. It requires someone who can feel the discomfort of repetition and refuse to normalize it. It requires someone who can step outside of inherited patterns and make decisions that are not based on what has always been done, but on what should be done. And that kind of awareness, that kind of internal resistance is rare. But you have it. That is why your journey has felt isolating at times. Because when you begin to move differently, you naturally create distance from what has remained the same. When you start thinking differently, your decisions no longer align with expectations that were built around the old patterns. And when you begin to grow, you unintentionally challenge everything that has stayed stagnant. That is the cost of being the one who breaks the cycle. It is not always comfortable. It is not always understood. It is not always supported. But it is necessary. Because what you are doing is not just changing your life. You are altering the trajectory of everything connected to you. Every decision you make now carries a different kind of weight. Not in a negative sense, but in a meaningful one. Because when you choose differently, you create a new pattern. And when that new pattern is repeated, it replaces what once existed. That is how transformation happens, not in a single moment, but through consistent alignment over time. And this is where your role becomes clear. You are not here to fix everything at once. You are not here to force change in others. You are not here to carry the responsibility of everyone's growth. That is not your role. Your role is to become the example of what is possible when the cycle is no longer followed. Your role is to live differently, to respond differently, to choose differently, to no longer operate from the same place that produced the same outcomes. And as simple as that may sound, it is one of the most powerful shifts that can occur. Because once a new pattern is established, it begins to influence everything around it. It creates a new standard. It creates a new reference point. It creates a new direction that others can either choose to follow or not. But the option now exists. And that option did not exist before you. That is why this moment matters so much. You are not just becoming aware, you are stepping into responsibility. Not the kind that overwhelms you, but the kind that empowers you. The kind that reminds you that you are no longer bound to what has been. The kind that shows you that your future is not dictated by your past, but shaped by your present decisions. And those decisions are already changing. You may not even realize how much. But the fact that you are here, the fact that you are listening, the fact that you are understanding things at a deeper level than before, that is evidence. That is proof that the shift has already begun within you. And once it begins internally, it inevitably manifests externally. That is when you start to notice differences. Situations that would have once pulled you back no longer have the same effect. Reactions that once felt automatic begin to slow down, giving you space to choose something better. Opportunities that align with your growth begin to appear more clearly, while those that do not feel easier to walk away from. This is not coincidence. This is alignment in action. You are stepping into a version of yourself that does not continue the cycle. And as that version strengthens, the hold that the past once had over you weakens. This is what it means to break something at its root. Not by fighting it constantly, but by no longer feeding it with the same patterns. Not by resisting it with force, but by outgrowing it with awareness. Not by carrying it forward, but by setting it down completely. And that is exactly what you are doing. But understand this. Awakening to your role is only the beginning. Because once you step fully into it, once you fully align with the fact that you are the one meant to end what has been repeating, something else begins to happen. A shift that goes beyond your actions. A movement that is not just internal, but external. Something that has been building, quietly, behind the scenes. Because there comes a moment when what you have been doing meets something greater than effort alone. And what is about to unfold next is that moment. There are moments in life when change feels gradual, when growth unfolds slowly, almost quietly, over time. But then there are moments like this, moments where something shifts all at once. Not visibly at first, not in a way you can immediately point to, but in a way you can feel. A shift that happens beneath the surface before it ever shows itself outwardly. And tonight is one of those moments. What you have been walking through up until now has not been random progression. It has been preparation. Every realization, every moment of clarity, every instance where you chose differently instead of repeating what felt familiar, it has been building toward this exact point. Because there comes a moment where internal change reaches a threshold, and once that threshold is crossed, something external begins to move in response. That is what is happening now. There is a transition taking place. Not just in your thoughts, not just in your behavior, but in the overall direction of your life. The patterns that once operated without interruption are no longer flowing the same way. The momentum that once carried those cycles forward is beginning to slow, to weaken, to lose its consistency. And in its place something new is beginning to take hold. But this part is important to understand. The shift does not begin where you can see it. It begins where you can sense it. You may feel a difference before you can explain it. You may notice subtle changes in how you respond to things. Situations that would have once triggered you may now feel easier to step back from. Decisions that once felt complicated may now feel clearer, more direct. You may even feel a sense of distance from things that used to feel deeply connected to you. That is not disconnection. That is realignment. Because as the old patterns lose their hold, your connection to them naturally weakens. What once felt normal begins to feel unfamiliar. What once felt automatic begins to feel optional. And that shift in perception is what allows something new to enter. This is the moment where the direction begins to reverse. Not dramatically all at once, but decisively. Because once momentum changes, everything that follows begins to adjust accordingly. You are no longer moving in the same direction you were before. Even if externally things look similar, internally the trajectory has already changed. And that internal shift is what determines the external outcome. This is why tonight matters. Because it is not about a single event. It is about a turning point. A point where what has been building internally reaches a level where it can no longer remain contained. It begins to express itself through your actions, your decisions, your boundaries, your choices. And those expressions begin to create visible change. This is where things start to feel different in a noticeable way. You begin to recognize patterns earlier, before they fully play out. You begin to step away from situations that no longer align. Instead of staying and trying to make them work, you begin to prioritize clarity over familiarity, growth over comfort, alignment over repetition. And as you do that, something important happens. The old cycles lose their ability to continue. Because they require participation to survive. They require the same responses, the same decisions, the same patterns to keep repeating. And when those are no longer present, the cycle has nothing to attach itself to. This is how the reversal begins. Not through force, not through struggle, but through the absence of what once sustained it. And that absence is being created right now. Through your awareness, through your choices, through your decision to no longer move unconsciously. This is what makes this moment different from everything before it. You are not just reacting anymore. You are directing. You are not just experiencing patterns. You are interrupting them. You are not just moving forward blindly. You are moving forward with intention. And that intention is what shifts everything. Because once direction changes, outcomes follow. You may not see the full result immediately, but the process has already begun. The path you are on now does not lead to the same place the old patterns were taking you. It leads somewhere different. Somewhere that has not been experienced in your bloodline before. And that is where the true significance of this shift lies. You are stepping into new ground. Ground that is not shaped by repetition, but by decision. Ground that is not influenced by what has always been, but by what is now being chosen. Ground that reflects a new pattern, a new direction, a new outcome. And as this shift continues to unfold, something else will begin to happen. Things that were once hidden within those old patterns will begin to surface. Not because they are becoming stronger, but because they are being exposed as they lose their hold. What was once subtle will become clear. What was once confusing will begin to make sense. What was once overlooked will become impossible to ignore. Because exposure is the next step in the process. And what is about to be revealed next will show you exactly what has been operating behind the scenes all along. There is a phase in every transformation that cannot be avoided, a phase that many people misunderstand, resist, or even fear at first. It is the moment when everything that was once hidden begins to surface. Not subtly, not quietly, but clearly, sometimes uncomfortably clear. And that is exactly where you are now. Because once a shift begins, exposure follows. What was once buried within patterns cannot remain hidden when those patterns start to break. What was once overlooked cannot stay invisible when awareness increases. What once operated quietly in the background begins to step into the foreground, demanding to be seen for what it truly is. And this is not happening to disrupt you. It is happening to free you. You may already be noticing it. Things that never stood out before are now impossible to ignore. Behaviors that once felt normal now feel misaligned. Conversations that once seemed harmless now carry a different weight. Even your own reactions, your own thoughts, are becoming more visible to you, as if a light has been turned on inside your awareness. That is not coincidence. That is clarity rising. Because when something is exposed, it can no longer operate in the same way. Its power was in its subtlety. Its strength was in going unnoticed. But now that you see it, now that you recognize it, now that you understand it, it begins to lose its influence over you. This is where the truth becomes undeniable. You start to see how certain patterns were formed. You begin to understand why certain situations kept repeating. You recognize the connections between what happened before and what you experienced later. And suddenly, things that once felt random begin to make sense. This is not about blame. It is about understanding. Because understanding allows you to separate yourself from what is no longer aligned. And that separation is what creates freedom. There may be moments in this phase where things feel intense. Not because something new is being created, but because something old is being revealed. And revelation can feel overwhelming when it first appears, especially when it involves things that have been part of your life for a long time. But what you must remember is this: exposure is not destruction. It is correction. It is the moment where what was misaligned is brought into view so it can no longer continue unchecked. It is the moment where confusion is replaced with clarity, where assumption is replaced with understanding, where unconscious patterns are replaced with conscious awareness. And once that happens, everything changes. Because now, you are no longer navigating blindly. You are seeing with intention. You are recognizing what aligns and what does not. You are identifying what supports your growth and what holds it back. And most importantly, you are no longer mistaking familiarity for alignment. This is where many people hesitate, because exposure often requires decision. Once you see something clearly, you cannot pretend it is not there. Once you understand something fully, you cannot go back to not knowing. And that means you are now faced with choices that were not available to you before. Choices about what you allow. Choices about what you continue. Choices about what you walk away from. And those choices define what happens next. This is why this phase is so critical. Because exposure alone does not complete the process. It initiates the next step. Separation. Not in a dramatic or reactive way, but in a clear and intentional one. A separation between what belongs in your life moving forward and what does not. A separation between patterns that align with your growth and patterns that were only ever meant to be temporary. And as this separation begins to take shape, you will notice something else. Relief. Not immediate, not overwhelming, but gradual and steady. A sense of lightness where there was once heaviness. A sense of clarity where there was once confusion. A sense of direction where there was once uncertainty. Because what was weighing on you was never meant to stay. It was only meant to be recognized and then released. And that is what is happening now. You are not losing anything essential. You are shedding what was never meant to define you. You are not being disrupted. You are being refined. You are not being set back. You are being repositioned. And as this process continues, something even more significant begins to take place. Space is created. Space where the old patterns once existed. Space where new direction can now form. Space where something greater, something aligned, something intentional, something different, can begin to enter your life. Because once something is exposed and released, it does not leave a void. It creates an opening for restoration, an opening for alignment, an opening for what was always meant to take its place. And what is about to fill that space is not just change. It is restoration at a level you have not yet experienced. Type "I accept the truth" in the comments if you are ready to move forward. Lesson code 4040 is now activating clarity and release in your life. There is a truth that becomes unavoidable once clarity has taken its place, once exposure has done its work, once you can finally see what has been operating in your life without distortion. That truth is this: not everything can go with you into what is next. This is where the process deepens. Because it is one thing to recognize a pattern. It is another thing entirely to step away from what sustains it. And that is exactly what this moment is asking of you. Not forcefully, not dramatically, but decisively. Separation is not punishment. It is alignment. It is the natural result of seeing clearly and choosing differently. When something no longer aligns with who you are becoming, it begins to feel out of place. Conversations feel heavier. Environments feel draining. Connections feel strained, not because something is wrong with you, but because something has shifted within you. And once that shift happens, what no longer matches it becomes impossible to ignore. You may have already felt this. A distance growing where there was once comfort. A hesitation where there was once automatic participation. A quiet awareness telling you that something does not belong in your life the way it used to. And even if you tried to overlook it, even if you tried to maintain things as they were, it no longer felt the same. That is not confusion. That is clarity guiding you. Because once you outgrow a pattern, you also begin to outgrow the environments and dynamics that were built around it. And this is where many people struggle. Not because they do not see the truth, but because they are attached to what is familiar. Familiarity can feel safe, even when it is limiting, even when it is misaligned, even when it is part of the very cycle you are trying to break. And this is where your awareness must turn into action. You are not being asked to react emotionally. You are not being asked to make impulsive decisions. You are being asked to recognize what no longer aligns and to step back from it with intention. This may involve people, not necessarily in a dramatic sense, not in a way that creates conflict, but in a way that creates distance. Because not everyone who hath been part of your past is meant to be part of your future in the same way. Some connections were tied to who you were, not who you are becoming. And as you change, those connections either adjust or they fall out of alignment. This may also involve habits, ways of thinking, ways of responding, ways of approaching situations that once felt natural but now feel limiting. Patterns that once sustained the cycle but no longer support your growth. And just like external connections, these internal habits must also be released. Because separation is not only external, it is internal. It is the decision to no longer return to the same mindset that created the same outcomes. It is the willingness to let go of reactions that no longer reflect your awareness. It is the discipline of choosing alignment, even when familiarity calls you back. This is where the real shift takes place. Because as you separate from what no longer aligns, you create space for what does. And that space is not empty. It is intentional. It is prepared for something different. Something that matches your clarity. Something that supports your direction. Something that reflects the new pattern you are establishing. But this part requires trust. Because in the moment of separation, before the new fully enters, there can be a period of transition. A space where things feel quieter, where certain dynamics are no longer present, but new ones have not fully formed yet. This is not loss. This is realignment in progress. And if you try to fill that space too quickly with what is familiar, you risk pulling yourself back into what you have already outgrown. That is why patience matters here. That is why awareness must remain active. Because this phase is not about replacing quickly. It is about aligning correctly. You are not being asked to lose. You are being guided to refine. And refinement always involves letting go of what no longer serves the structure that is being built. This is not rejection. This is redirection. It is the moment where your life begins to organize itself around your growth instead of your past patterns. It is where your environment, your decisions, your connections begin to reflect who you are now, not who you used to be. And as this separation becomes clearer, something else begins to take shape. Stability. Not the kind that comes from repetition, but the kind that comes from alignment. A sense of groundedness that is not dependent on external consistency, but on internal clarity. A sense of direction that does not waver with circumstances, because it is rooted in awareness. This is what prepares you for what comes next. Because once separation has taken place, once the old has been released and the space has been created, something begins to return. Not what you had before, but what was always meant for you. Restoration. And what is about to be restored will not resemble the patterns you left behind. It will reflect the clarity you have stepped into. Type "I release what no longer serves me" in the comments if you are ready for this separation. Blessing code 5050 is now activating alignment in your life. As you step into this moment of release, understand that every act of alignment you make does not only transform your life, it becomes a ripple that reaches others still trapped in their cycles. There are souls right now waiting for the same clarity you just received, waiting for a message that breaks their chains. When you give through PayPal or Super Thanks, you are not supporting a channel. You are sowing light into darkness, planting seeds into lives that are ready for transformation. The word declares that when you give, it opens doors and multiplies back into your life, and this is your moment to step into that flow. If you feel that inner nudge, that quiet conviction, then act on it now. The PayPal link is in the description, and you can also access it through the QR code at the bottom right of the video. Do not delay this moment of obedience. Release your seed and become part of the impact heaven is creating through you. There is a moment that follows every true separation, a moment that many do not recognize at first because they are still adjusting to what they released. But it is real, it is intentional, and it is already beginning to unfold in your life. That moment is restoration, not a return to what was, but a return of what was always meant to be yours. You must understand this clearly. Nothing you released in alignment was ever meant to be permanent loss. What left your life as you stepped into clarity was not taken from you unjustly. It was removed because it could not follow you into what is now being prepared. And once that removal creates space, something else begins to move toward you. Something that matches who you are now. This is where the shift becomes undeniable. Because restoration does not look like repetition. It does not bring back the same patterns, the same outcomes, the same limitations. It does not rebuild what was already proven to be misaligned. Instead, it introduces something different, something that carries the essence of what you were meant to have, but without the distortion that once surrounded it. You may begin to notice this in subtle ways at first. A sense of peace where there used to be tension. A sense of clarity where there used to be confusion. A sense of direction where there used to be hesitation. These are not small changes. They are foundational. Because restoration begins internally before it manifests externally. It begins in your perception, in your awareness, in your ability to recognize what aligns with you and what does not. And once that internal restoration takes place, it naturally begins to reflect outward. This is where opportunities begin to feel different. You are no longer drawn to what simply looks familiar. You are drawn to what feels aligned. You are no longer reacting to what is available. You are choosing based on what fits the direction you are now moving in. And because of that, what enters your life begins to change. Not by force, but by alignment. This is how restoration works. It does not push its way in. It meets you where you are now. And because you are no longer the same person who carried those old patterns, what you attract and what you accept is no longer the same either. This is why you may feel a sense of calm where there was once urgency, a sense of confidence where there was once doubt, a sense of stability that is not dependent on external circumstances, but rooted in your internal clarity. That is restoration taking form. It is not loud at first. It is steady. It builds. It strengthens. And as it continues, it becomes undeniable. You begin to see results that do not match your past experiences. Situations unfold differently. Outcomes shift. The same areas of your life that once reflected struggle begin to reflect progress. Not because everything has suddenly become perfect, but because the foundation has changed. You are no longer operating from the same place. And because of that, your results cannot remain the same. This is where many people begin to realize just how much has changed. Not in a dramatic moment, but in a series of consistent differences that add up over time. You start to recognize that you are no longer dealing with the same level of resistance. You are no longer repeating the same mistakes. You are no longer returning to the same situations. That is not coincidence. That is confirmation. Confirmation that what was once active has lost its hold. Confirmation that what once defined your experience no longer determines your outcome. Confirmation that the direction has truly shifted. And as this restoration continues, something even more significant begins to happen. What was delayed begins to move. What felt blocked begins to open. What seemed distant begins to come closer. Not because time suddenly changed, but because alignment removed what was standing in the way. This is where the deeper level of restoration begins. Not just in your internal state, but in your external reality. Opportunities that were once out of reach begin to align with your path. Connections that support your growth begin to form. Situations that once felt uncertain begin to stabilize. And through all of this, you begin to recognize something clearly. You are no longer trying to make things work. Things are beginning to work with you. That is the difference. That is the shift. That is what happens when cycles are broken and alignment takes their place. And as this continues to unfold, you begin to understand something even more important. This is not temporary. This is not a moment that will pass and return to what it was. This is a new pattern being established. A pattern that is not based on repetition of the past, but on alignment with your present. And because of that, it does not just affect you. It extends beyond you. Because what you are establishing now becomes the new foundation moving forward. The new reference point. The new direction that replaces what once existed. This is how everything changes, not in a single moment, but through a shift that continues to build, continues to expand, continues to redefine what is possible. And as this restoration becomes more visible, something else becomes clear. You are not just experiencing change. You are becoming the source of it. And what you are stepping into next will show you just how far that change will reach. There is a point in every true transformation where the focus shifts from what is being removed to what is being established. You have moved through awareness. You have stepped through exposure. You have embraced separation. You are now experiencing restoration. But what all of this hath been leading toward is something even greater than personal change. It is legacy. Because what is happening in your life right now is not isolated. It does not begin and end with you. It extends beyond you, forward into everything that will come after you. And that is where the full weight of this moment becomes clear. You are not just breaking a cycle. You are establishing a new pattern. A pattern that did not exist before. A pattern that is not rooted in limitation, confusion, or repetition, but in clarity, alignment, and intentional direction. And once that pattern is established, it does something powerful. It replaces what came before it. This is how a bloodline changes, not through a single moment, but through a shift that becomes consistent enough to redefine what is normal. What you are doing now becomes the new reference point, the new standard, the new foundation that everything connected to you will begin to build from. And this is where your role becomes even more significant. Because everything you have gone through, everything you have learned, everything you have shifted, it is not only for your benefit. It is creating a path that others will not have to struggle through in the same way. It is removing obstacles that once existed so that they do not continue forward. That is what makes this moment generational. You are not just stepping into a different life. You are altering the direction of an entire lineage. This is why the process felt intense. This is why the awareness came with weight. This is why the resistance felt persistent. Because what you were confronting was not temporary, it was embedded. And anything that had been embedded for a long time requires intentional effort to remove. But now that it hath been confronted, now that it hath been interrupted, now that it hath been replaced, something new takes its place. Stability. Not the kind that comes and goes, but the kind that builds over time. The kind that becomes consistent. The kind that no longer depends on external circumstances to remain intact. A stability that is rooted in alignment, not repetition. And from that stability, everything else begins to grow. Decisions become clearer. Direction becomes stronger. Opportunities become more aligned. And as those things continue to develop, the difference between what was and what is becomes undeniable. You begin to see how far things have shifted, not just in your life, but in the way life responds to you. Because when your foundation changes, your results change. When your patterns change, your outcomes change. When your direction changes, your destination changes. And that new destination does not carry the same limitations that once defined your path. This is where legacy is formed. Not in what you say, but in what you consistently do. Not in what you intend, but in what you maintain. Because what you maintain becomes what is passed forward. And now, what you are maintaining is different. You are maintaining clarity instead of confusion. You are maintaining alignment instead of repetition. You are maintaining intentional decisions instead of automatic reactions. And those shifts, repeated over time, create something that did not exist before. A new normal. This is what will continue. This is what will extend beyond you. And as this new pattern becomes stronger, something else becomes clear. You are no longer influenced by what defined the past. You are now influencing what defines the future. That is the transition you have stepped into. From participant to creator. From someone who experienced the cycle to someone who ended it. From someone who adapted to patterns to someone who established new ones. And the transition is permanent. Because once a new pattern is established at this level, it does not revert back to what it was before. It continues forward, building on itself, strengthening over time, expanding its influence. This is how transformation becomes legacy. This is how change becomes permanent. This is how what once felt like a personal struggle becomes a generational breakthrough. And now that this new foundation is in place, now that this new direction has been established, there is only one thing left to understand. This moment matters, not just because of what has already changed, but because of what can still be lost if it is ignored. Because every transformation reaches a point where it must be sustained. And what you are about to hear next is the one thing you cannot afford to overlook. There is something that must be understood with absolute clarity now, something that cannot be softened, cannot be overlooked, and cannot be delayed. Every transformation reaches a point where awareness is no longer enough. A point where understanding must turn into action. And that is exactly where you are standing right now. Because this moment, this exact moment, is not just about what has been revealed to you. It is about what you choose to do with it. You have seen the pattern. You have felt the shift. You have recognized what no longer aligns. You have stepped into separation and begun to experience restoration. But here is the truth that cannot be ignored. If this awareness is not sustained, if these decisions are not maintained, if this clarity is not protected, the same patterns that once operated silently can begin to rebuild themselves. Not immediately, not in an obvious way, but gradually, quietly, subtly, because patterns do not disappear completely without consistency. They weaken, they lose their hold, but if given the same conditions again, they can begin to reform. That is why this moment carries weight. Not because something is about to be taken from you, but because something must now be protected by you. You are no longer unaware. And once awareness is present, responsibility follows. Not in a burdensome way, but in a necessary one. Because what you have broken free from cannot be returned to unconsciously. You cannot go back to reacting the same way, choosing the same environments, tolerating the same misalignment, and expect a different outcome. That is not how transformation works. Transformation requires maintenance. It requires consistency. It requires the decision to remain aligned even when it would be easier to fall back into what is familiar. And this is where many people lose the shift they worked so hard to reach. Not because they failed, but because they stopped being intentional. They saw the truth, but they did not sustain the action. They felt the shift, but they did not protect the direction. They experienced clarity, but they allowed themselves to drift back into what felt comfortable instead of what was aligned. And slowly, over time, the old patterns found their way back in. This is what you must avoid. Not through fear, not through prayer, but through awareness. You are not at risk of losing everything overnight. That is not how this works. But what can happen, if you become passive again, is a gradual return to the same conditions that once sustained the cycle. Small compromises, small decisions, small moments where you choose familiarity over alignment. And over time, those small moments add up. That is why this is a warning, not of danger but of drift. Because drift is what pulls you away from what you have already established. And drift is subtle. It does not announce itself. It does not feel significant at first. But it accumulates. and that accumulation determines direction. You have already changed direction. You have already stepped onto a different path. But staying on that path requires intention. It requires awareness that remains active. It requires decisions that continue to reflect who you are now, not who you used to be. This is not about being perfect. It is about being consistent. Because consistency is what solidifies transformation. Consistency is what turns change into permanence. Consistency is what ensures that what has been broken does not rebuild itself. And you have everything you need to do this. You have the awareness. You have the clarity. You have the understanding of what aligns and what does not. Now, it becomes a matter of application. A matter of choosing, moment by moment, to remain aligned with what you have already stepped into. This is where your role becomes active. Not just as someone who experienced a shift, but as someone who sustains it. Because sustaining the shift is what protects the new pattern you have created. It is what ensures that the legacy you are building continues forward without interruption. It is what keeps you moving in the direction that has already been set. And as long as you remain aware, as long as you remain intentional, as long as you continue to choose alignment over familiarity, the old patterns will not regain their hold. They cannot. Because you are no longer the same. But this is the final threshold. The moment where everything you have understood must now be lived. A moment where awareness becomes action. A moment where clarity becomes consistency. Because what happens next depends on what you choose now. Type I stay aligned in the comments if you are committed to maintaining this shift. Blessing code 6060 now reinforcing strength and consistency in your life. This is the moment everything has been leading to. Not the beginning, not the middle, but the activation. Because everything you have heard, everything you have understood, everything you have felt shifting within you, it was never meant to remain as knowledge alone. It was meant to become identity. It was meant to become movement. It was meant to become the way you live from this moment forward. And that moment is now. You are no longer the person who was unaware. You are no longer the person who was caught in cycles without understanding them. You are no longer the person who questioned why things kept repeating without seeing the pattern behind it. That version of you has already ended. What stands here now is someone different. Someone who sees clearly. Someone who chooses intentionally. Someone who recognizes alignment and no longer negotiates with what does not match it. This is your new identity. Not something you are trying to become, but something you are stepping into. Because the shift has already happened within you. The clarity has already been activated. The awareness has already separated you from what once controlled you. Now, the only thing left is to fully walk in it. This is what activation means. It is not waiting for something else to happen. It is recognizing that what needed to happen already has. And now, you move accordingly. You think differently. You respond differently. You decide differently. Not because you are forcing change, but because you are no longer the same person who made the old choices. That is the difference. And this is where everything locks into place. Because once identity shifts, behavior follows naturally. You do not have to struggle to maintain alignment. You begin to live from it. You do not have to constantly remind yourself of what you learned. It becomes how you see. You do not have to force distance from what no longer serves you. You simply no longer connect with it in the same way. This is the final transition. From awareness to embodiment. From understanding to living. From knowing to being. And this is where the true power of this moment is realized. Because you are no longer preparing for change. You are now walking in it. Every decision you make from this point forward carries this new alignment. Every situation you encounter is filtered through this new awareness. Every opportunity you consider is evaluated based on this new clarity. And because of that, your life cannot return to what it was. That path is closed, not by force, not by restriction, but by transformation. You have outgrown it, completely. And now, what lies ahead is not uncertainty, it is direction. A direction that is not based on repetition but on intention. A direction that is not influenced by past patterns, but by present clarity. A direction that continues to build, strengthen, and expand the new foundation you have created. This is where your authority begins. Not authority over others, but authority over your own life. Authority over your choices. Authority over what you allow, what you accept, and what you continue. Because once you step into this level of awareness, you no longer operate from reaction. You operate from decision. And that changes everything. You are no longer waiting for things to align. You are choosing alignment. You are no longer hoping for different outcomes. You are creating them through consistent direction. You are no longer defined by what has been. You are defined by what you now maintain. This is the activation. This is the moment where everything becomes real. Not as an idea, not as a possibility, but as your reality. And from this point forward, everything continues to build on what you have established here. This is not temporary. This is not a phase. This is a permanent shift. A new identity. A new direction. A new foundation that will continue to shape everything that comes next. And now, there is only one thing left for you to do. Step fully into it. Without hesitation. Without doubt. Without looking back. Because what you are stepping into has been waiting for you to arrive. Type "I step into my NEW identity" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 7777 is now activated around your life. As you step into this new identity, understand this truth. Every seed you release becomes a light in someone else's darkness. This is not about supporting a channel. This is about expanding a divine mission that is reaching souls who are still trapped in cycles you just broke. The word declares that when you sow, you open the heavens over your life. And right now, you have the opportunity to become part of something eternal. I feel this deeply. I am being called to help this message reach someone who needs it. If that resonates within you, act now. The PayPal link is in the description, and you can also use the QR code at the bottom right of this video. Do not delay. Release your seed in this moment of alignment, and watch how what you give becomes multiplied back into your life in ways you cannot yet see.